All right, so distribution. Now there's several ways to write this, but generally what I just do is just move it through. But when we get to some of these bigger ones, I'm going to show you a different way to write it that may be more helpful for you. So here, the 5, everybody is going to get a 5 times. So when we distribute, we are going to have 5 times, I just can't write today. 5 times A minus 5 times 3. Now we could also, and it's probably more proper to write this as plus 5 times negative 3, but that will end up being a negative number, which is then subtraction. Either way is correct though. So the 5 times A is just, we can just smush it as 5A. And then 5 times 3 is 15. So we have 5A's minus 15. All right, now our next one gets a little crazier. Like there's more terms going on. And the more terms you get, the more likely you are to make a mistake and to miss something. So when you distribute one term across several terms, you should end up, your end result should have the same number of terms as what's inside the parentheses here. Now, if there's more than one thing that you have to distribute, that's a little bit different. And then there's, the possibility of like terms. But for this, and this makes a lot more sense if you're doing like a 2 by 2 where you're doing the binomials and it's an actual FOIL. But I'm going to write the long one up top. And then the 6 on the side. And what we're going to do is multiply the 6 times the negative 9x, then the 6 times the 8y, then the 6 times the negative 12z. You do not have to do this way. I'm just offering it as a slightly different way to perform distribution. So 6 times negative 9 is, no, this one, 654, but negative. Still with the x. Now 6 times 8y's, 6 times 8 is 48 with the y. Then 6 times negative 12, 6 dozen is 72. So this is negative 72 with a z. So those 3 terms that I just wrote in green inside the box there are our answer. But we do need to preserve what the operation was. So 48 is positive. You don't have to write the plus, but when you're going to write all 3 terms or type all 3 terms for your answer, you do need to see that plus in there. Otherwise, it's assumed to be multiplication. So our answer here is negative 54x plus 48y minus 72z. So that is what Alex would expect you to type in for this. Now the order you write them in actually doesn't matter. So if you put the 48y first and then put minus 54x minus 72z, it would take it. But it would also tell you normally we write them in alphabetical order or preserve the order we were given them in. Or, yeah. But it still counts it correct. So that's where I'm like, yeah. Give me the next one. All right. So now I have negative 28 and then 2 terms inside. So I'm going to write it out like I did on A. So this will then become negative 28 times, and I'm going to write negative 6x. You know what? Everybody's going to get parentheses. The plus here is the plus here, and then negative 28 and 3y. All right, so I can reassociate and then just multiply the number parts. So negative 28 times negative 6, negative times negative becomes positive. So 6 times 20 is 120, 6 times 8 is 48, so that's 168. still with the x. Then I have plus negative 28 times 3y. So 3 negative 28s gets really negative. Almost, so 60 and 24, 84. But it is negative 84. So we could write it like this, negative 84y. Or you could just write minus 84y without the addition. Just change it into subtraction. Either of those is correct. If it helps you to see it as plus and then the negative sign stuck on the number, so when you move it around, you remember that negative sign is there, that's fine. Like I said, I did that for years before I was used to just automatically thinking of that. Now here, negatives everywhere, good Lord. But again, we're just going to move that through. So I'm going to write it with the parentheses instead of the box. So this will become negative 18 times negative 4. We're going to end up with a lot of parentheses. Plus negative 18 times negative 11p plus negative 18 times negative 5q. That is my weird handwritten q. It almost looks like a really crazy 8, so just FYI. Now we crunch the numbers. So 4 18s, 40 and 32, 72. Negative times negative is positive. All right, so 72. Negative 18 times negative 11 will be positive, so I'll just go ahead and write the plus. And then 11 18s, 180, and then one more 18 will be 198. With the p. And then negative times negative again is positive. So 5 18s is 50 and 40, 90. So 90 q. I do way too much mental math. I do not expect you guys to crunch that in your head, crunch it on the calculator. Like, you know, if you're really comfy with your numbers and you can do it in your head, that's awesome. But if you're not 110% confident in your ability to crunch that in your head, just use the calculator, because I'd rather you guys consistently knew what you were doing than kind of like fumbling in your head, like, I should be able to do this. Yeah, but you got a tool right there that already does it. Like, sure, I could hammer in a nail with my forehead, but I'd rather use a hammer. It's more efficient. All right. Now this is just our vague directions of simplify the expression. So this like simplify, it has simple in it. Like, yeah, this is the vaguest direction in math. Because there's no like, when do I stop? How do I know it's simplified? What if I think that's simple? So when we say simplify the expression, generally what it means is get rid of parentheses, combine any like terms. That's it. So that is what we are going to try to do. So I have negative 11 plus 16 plus c grouped together. But the parentheses there, they're just like sitting there for the associative property, but we don't actually need them. There's not a number between the plus and the parenthesis. If there was a number there, then we'd have to distribute. But with no number, or sometimes we consider it the invisible 1, because 1 times something is the same. But here, this is really the same as negative 11 plus 16 plus c. And then those numbers can be combined. Negative 11 plus 16 takes us positive 5. So we could write this as 5 plus c. Math grammar rule, colloquially, is to write the variable first. Really, it doesn't matter. Alex will take either of those answers, and if it doesn't, I will kick it. All right, now b here, though. So it looks like negative 9 minus 5 plus x, but If that's what it was, there would have to be a plus between the -9 and that parenthesis. But where the parenthesis is, now there's nothing between the 9, the -9 and the parentheses, so that is multiplication. So this is a distribution, not what we had on A. So make sure you can look at those and tell the difference, because I've had some people make that mistake. So this is going to become -9 times -5 plus -9 times x. Negative and negative will be positive. 5 nines is 45. And then we can write plus -9x or just minus 9x. Either is acceptable. All right. And the parentheses are gone. Now, is that simpler? Depends on what you're going to try to do. That's why I hate these directions. There are times where having the -9 factored out would be preferable to having it all multiplied out. Then down here, -7 smushed onto 18m. So 18 times m. So I have -7 times 18 times m. That's all times. There's no addition here. We only distribute multiplication across addition or subtraction, but we don't distribute multiplication across multiplication. So if your brain was looking at this like, oh, we distribute, we have to see a plus or a minus. Even if it was -18m, it's still not minus 18m. Like, there has to be two terms separated by a plus or a minus to invoke distribution. So this is just regroup the -7 times 18, which is 70 and 56, so 126, but it's negative with an m. So -126m. Then this last crazy one, I have -4 on the outside, but there's nothing between the -4 and the parentheses, so this is going to get multiplied in. And then inside, I see -45, and if that's where it stopped, it'd just be multiplying. But then it has -2y, or plus -2y, if you will. This invokes a distribution because of the times here, and then having a plus or a minus, an addition or subtraction rather there. All right, so we're going to have -4 times -45, and then plus -4 times -2y. So I automatically, instead of subtraction, see plus negative. So that thing that I'm multiplying to is -2y. So -4 times -45. Well, 2 45s is 90. So another 2 would be 180. And now it's positive. Then -4 times -2 is positive. 4 times 2 is 8. Still has the y. You could write that as 8y plus 180. 180 plus 8y is fine. Like, they gave you the order kind of backwards, so I feel it's okay to type the order in backwards because that's what they gave you. All right. So we've played around with how to simplify the expression. And here we were combining constants or multiplying coefficients. Next, we're actually going to start working with the like terms.